Good morning, everyone. We want to welcome you to our fall lecture series, and welcome to all of you who have joined us online. It's a beautiful Sabbath morning, and we're glad that you chose to be with us for this presentation this morning. Our fall lecture series is featuring Dr. Larry Herr. Dr. Herr did his original degree at Andrews University in 1970 and then went to Harvard University, where he spent a number of years in the Department of Near Eastern Literature and Civilization, completing his PhD in 1977. After that, he began his teaching career in the Philippines and then eventually ended up at Burman University, which some of us old-timers remember as Canadian Union College. Over the years, Dr. Herr has been involved in or led at least 30 archaeological expeditions to the Near East, starting in Tunisia, then in Israel, and finally, principally in Jordan. He has a particular interest in pottery and the development of writing and language. And this morning's presentation is going to be on the Archaeology of Solomon. So, Dr. Herr, the time is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. Did I press a wrong button up there, Gumi, or something? Okay, excellent. Solomon has had bad shrift recently. There's been an Israeli archaeologist who claims that he really didn't do very much. You know, long ago, Mark Twain has a chapter in the book Huckleberry Finn. Was Solomon wise? In which the slave Jim doubts that Solomon was really wise, because how could you have 1,000 wives, have so many children? The blim-blamming in the nursery would have been so loud, worse than a boiler factory. He couldn't understand how a wise man would have 1,000 wives, let alone 2. And so I think Jim, the slave, was kind of wise too. About Solomon. Solomon, in fact, did do some things that were unfortunate. He gave away a lot of Israel's land that David had conquered and several other things. But he was a builder. Yeah. Not as great as Herod, whom we talked about last evening. Herod was really spectacular. But I want to show you a few of these buildings that Solomon looked at, that Solomon built there. Archaeologists are noted for choosing strange biblical texts. You probably have never heard a sermon based on 1 Kings 9:15. Pastor Kevin, I don't think you've ever preached a sermon based on 1 Kings 9:15. But we archaeologists love it. Why? Because it talks about building places. If they built places, archaeologists should be able to find them, right? And so if we can find those remains from those buildings, hey, that's pretty good. And so 1 Kings 9:15 has become one of the signature verses in the whole Bible for archaeologists. And I'm going to show you why. And this is the account of the forced labor. Solomon actually enslaved some of his people. Not wise, but he did it. Why did he do it? Because he wanted to build the house of Yahweh. Why do I use the word Yahweh? That was the personal name of the God of Israel. It's usually translated in the King James Version and many of our other English versions as the Lord, with the words of Lord all capitalized to show you that, hey, it really wasn't the word Lord, it was the name of God, which was Yahweh. I'm going to explain that a little bit later in this afternoon's lecture. When we get to the origins of the name Yahweh. So the house of Yahweh, which was the temple, this is seen as the dwelling place, the house of God. His own house, that would be the palace there in Jerusalem. In fact, his palace in Jerusalem took almost 14 years to build, the temple 7. That was where his values were. His house was more important, well, in a way. The Milo, we don't know what the Milo was. That's the Hebrew word. We suspect it might be something. I'll show you what it may have been. But anyway, the Milo. The wall of Jerusalem, we have yet to find Solomon's wall of Jerusalem. Maybe part of David's wall has been found within the last 10 years. And then, here's the big point of it. The 3 major royal cities. We pronounce this Hatzor, not Hazor, but Hatzor. The Z is kind of like in pizza. Yeah, it's a ts sound. Hatzor, Megiddo. You may have heard of Megiddo before. When you use the word Armageddon, you're using that name. Ar is from the Hebrew word for mountain. Har, Megiddo. So the mountain of Megiddo, of course, it was a very large ancient site. And then finally, Gezer. No, not Gezer, Gezer. All right. The word means carrot in Hebrew, of all things. Maybe they grew carrots there. I don't know. But we're going to center mainly on these 3, a little bit Jerusalem, but mainly these 3 royal cities which Solomon built. But we're going to start at Jerusalem because that's the first site mentioned during the time of in 1 Kings 9:15. Okay, this is a modern picture, aerial picture of part of Jerusalem. This was the royal city of David. We call it the city of David on this little ridge here. And Solomon's temple here. Solomon's palace would have been about here. So note this. In order to get to the temple, you had to go through Solomon's palace. So that the temple was actually kind of subservient or a part of Solomon's palace. It was his palace, his temple. So when we say Solomon's temple, we're being really quite accurate. So that was up here. David's administrative area was down in this location. Most of the people lived on this ridge here. Why that ridge? This ridge was the Jebusite city and then conquered by David. It was quite small. And then Solomon's addition up to the north, much higher there, the temple. Why did they have a city on such a low area? Because there was water. Water is all important in this part of the world, of course, especially in the summer when it doesn't rain for about 6 months. And then the valley is where they planted their crops, the valley of Kidron. So we have here the temple, the palace area, the administrative center. This may have been the Milo. Did you see how steep this slope was? There's going to be a curious thing we're going to show right there that may have been this Milo. The word simply means fill. And then the spring and the Kidron Valley. That's the essential parts of Jerusalem during the time of David, Solomon, and even until the time of Hezekiah, when there was a massive influx of refugees from Samaria, when the Assyrians destroyed the city of Samaria and the kingdom of northern Israel. Lots of people came down to Judah, and Jerusalem quadrupled in size at that time. Some people have suggested that this stepped structure going down the hill like this and above the spring area over here was this Milo. Look at all the stones they have, and the stones are not small. They aren't like the pyramids of Egypt, but they're about like this. A 1.5 feet in diameter or so, making up look how beautifully built it is. We think it was built to provide foundations for the administrative structure of David and Solomon's rule up on top of it. Otherwise, it may have fallen down into the valley. These houses here, built later on top of that structure, can you imagine building your house on a steep step structure like this? That's how crowded things got in Jerusalem after this. All those refugees came down from the north. This house right here, and it was part of several houses, 3 houses have been found in a row here, all from the time just prior to the Babylonian captivity, the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in 586. And so these were houses that were destroyed then. But inscriptions, seal impressions, all sorts of things have been found from those houses there on top of what we think may have been this Milo, this possible step structure. On top of that, you see this nicely shaped wall here continuing and then continuing over here coming out. These are towers that would have strengthened the strategic importance of the city of Jerusalem. They are from the time of the Maccabees. Many Christians, Protestants especially, don't know about the Maccabees very much. They were from the intertestamental period. There are 2 books in the Apocrypha called Maccabees. If you ever want some entertaining reading, and by entertaining I don't mean fictitious or false or anything like that, they're sort of like the books of Kings, Samuel and Kings. Read First Maccabees. It's about the wars, the revolt of the Jewish people under a family called Maccabee, or they're called Hasmoneans as well. But they revolted against the kings of Syria, during this time. Remember, Alexander's conquests were divided into 4 groups, One of those was Seleucus, and the Seleucid Empire controlled Jerusalem at that time. This Maccabee family got the Jews to rebel against the Seleucids, and they got independence for about 100 years. And the book of First Maccabees is about that process. It's a very interesting book. It's the Apocrypha. Don't be afraid of the Apocrypha. Many Protestants are, unfortunately. But the Apocrypha can have interesting books in it. Don't be afraid of it. Read them. And that wall came from the time of the Maccabees after they had successfully revolted. This is a painting of Jerusalem at the time of Solomon. Notice how small the original Jebusite town was. Here's the spring right down here. This would be, yes, the water gate, where you go out to get water. Actually, they didn't go outside the gate to get water. One thing this painting is missing is very recent excavations in Jerusalem have shown how there was actually a major wall that came out and surrounded where the water came out from the Gihon spring. Major walls, stones that are huge, 3-4 feet in diameter, and built very high so that the women or girls could come in and get water protected. This is the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives. An invading army could easily just stand on this slope and lob stones there. So they had to build this massive wall to protect people getting the water. Do I need this? Not right now. The spring also, during the time of Solomon, it seems, they dug a tunnel going along here and under the ground, under the bedrock, actually, with openings along the way so that they could bring out water to irrigate the fields. People lived down here. This was the administrative complex. This was maybe the Milo right there. Administrative complex built by David and reused by Solomon, of course. And then the Palace of Solomon right here. Notice how large it is and rambling it was. And then the temple up at the top facing east with the 2 famous columns, the Yakin and Boaz, are right there. So you have all this activity going on in Jerusalem. This may be what 1 Kings 9:15 is referring to there. The rest of our time, we will be talking about these three royal cities. Hatzor in the north, way up here north of the Sea of Galilee, okay, right on the edge of the Galilee Mountains. Galilee Mountains are quite nice. You know, I have another lecture I give called A Land Flowing with Milk and Honey. And Israel is a small nation, but within it you can produce almost every fruit and vegetable that the world produces anywhere else. That is because of the Jordan Valley. Well below sea level, you can have banana plantations. Some of the best mangoes I've had in my life, and I lived in the Philippines, I had really good mangoes there. But some of the best mangoes I've had are produced right here south of the Sea of Galilee. And in Jerusalem, you can get those in the marketplace. My mouth is watering right now because of all this. You can get in Golan Heights up here and in Galilee are high enough so that you can get plums, apples, pears, peaches, all of this temperate climate fruits. And then, of course, along the coast here, you get all in these mountains right here. You can get olives and figs and things like that. And then citrus fruits, all kinds of citrus fruits on the coastal plain. This is a highly productive region. It is not desert. You have desert down here, but not here. Okay. In fact, I have a picture of my wife and Dana Waters here, or her sister, going through the city of Dan up here. It's a downright jungle, right? The origins of the Jordan River are up there at the foot of Mount Hermon, 8,000 feet above sea level. The Israelis have a skiing resort up there on Mount Hermon, as do the Lebanese up north. So Hatzor, the largest city in Canaan before the Israelites arrived and began to build their city, but it was a huge city at the time of the Canaanites there. Hatzor, important. And then there's Megiddo, also very important. Why? The Carmel Mountains. You know, Mount Carmel is not just one mountain. It's actually a range of mountains that go from the sea. That's why you have this little knob sticking out here. The highest mountain is right there at the end. The Carmel Mountains go all the way along the Esdrelon Valley here, which is the breadbasket of ancient and modern Israel. There are 3 passes that go through the Carmel Mountains, one up here, one down here, and one over here. Actually, the Megiddo is right there. So 1, 2, 3. The Megiddo Pass right here is by far the largest of these. Armies marched through here. Many battles fought in the region of Megiddo. That's why they use Armageddon, the mountain of Megiddo, as a symbolic battlefield. There were a lot of famous battles, the most famous being the one between the Egyptians who were going north and the Hittites who were coming south. And the Egyptians won by doing a ruse. So that's Megiddo right there on the pass. Important because the breadbasket of Israel sent crops and wheat and all that down to the south. If that was blocked by enemy forces, they couldn't trade very well. The roads going through the mountains here were rough, difficult, windy, uphill, downhill, and so it was best to come through the pass, down along the coast, and then go up here. Gezer was out on the plain right here just before you get to the mountains. And today you can see both Tel Aviv right here and you can't see Jerusalem from Gezer, but you can see the mountains in front of it. And then Jerusalem right here, between the passes, the road that goes along the crest of the mountains, and then the one that goes down to Jericho, the Jordan Valley, and up into the Ammonite territory. So these are important cities and of strategic value. The king, any king, controlling this area would want to make sure that he had those cities. And so we call those cities royal cities. Those are the ones mentioned in 1 Kings 9:15. I'm going to start this by talking about an archaeologist, an Israeli archaeologist. He had been a general in the army before he became an archaeologist, so he knew how to organize people. Yeah. And he excavated at the site of Hatzor, that one in the far north, right? The largest city during the Canaanite times. But the Canaanites lost out. They disappeared at this site. When the Israelites came back in the time of Solomon, it was small. We're seeing here Solomon's city, and it goes right across here, half of the upper city of the Canaanites. There was also a lower city of the Canaanites. This was by far the largest site in the Holy Land. Solomon's was only half of the upper city. When Ahab added on to that a century later, he added twice as much to the east here. We're going to see a bit of Ahab here too. Ahab was another big builder and actually a successful king. In many ways, archaeologically, we can show that. But what I want to center on here, Yigal Yadin, this Israeli archaeologist who had been the general, Yadin, I will call him from here on, discovered two primary things that he could date to the 10th century, the time, roughly, of Solomon. You can see them in this picture right here. One of those elements, do you see two walls that are parallel, kind of? You have to look closely. Those who are in the front have an advantage, okay? But these two walls and then some cross walls, that's called a casemate wall in castle architecture, okay? So we borrow that castle word and apply it here. So he found this dating to the 10th century. Above it, he found a solid wall dating to the time of Ahab. We're going to see these things a little bit later too. He also found a city gate here. We're going to see that in more detail. It had 6 chambers. And then, well, not dating to Solomon's time, dating to Ahab's time, was a water shaft. They dug a long stairway down to the water table inside the city so they could get their water that way. And then Ahab's palace, it probably was Solomon's as well before, but people haven't dug deeply enough over here to be sure of that because Ahab's palace is so well preserved. They don't want to destroy it to get down to the lower levels. This is now a drawing of the upper city of Hatzor. You can kind of see what's going on. The green is Solomonic, 10th century. The gold is 9th century, the time of Ahab. So you can see that the palace here was dating to the time of Ahab. They don't show the water source right here, but several other buildings here are all Ahab. You can see that the city wall extended along these lines to the time of Ahab. In Solomon's time, though, here's the casemate wall and the city gate. Okay, those are the two things that I want to especially call your attention to. And in this sort of balloon picture, a camera attached to a balloon, you can see the casemate wall clearly here, right? With walls going in between. The reason for a casemate wall was you could use these as dwelling places or storage places or something like that. But in case an enemy attacked you, you could fill in between. Just bring a whole bunch of stones and dirt and everything, fill it in quickly in a few days, and voila, you have a solid wall that is quite thick, that is 8 to 10 meters, that's 30 feet, 25 to 30 feet thick. A big solution, I think, to warfare, possible warfare. Here you see the city gate. Gates were a problem because you have doorways that are weak, Invading armies can use battering rams to knock down the doorways. So the more doorways you had in your gate, the taller the gate towers, okay, the stronger it would be. These 6-chamber gates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we don't count these on the outside, they were towers, okay? And they were separate. But you can see that there were doors going into these chambers, right? These walls did not go up high. They were open. But you had doorways going across. So there were 4 doorways an enemy group would have to knock down and overcome in order to get into the city through these gateways. So Yadin noticed that he had casemate walls and he had 6-chamber gates associated with those casemate walls, all right? 2 towers out in front. And another thing, most of the stones that ancient people used in their walls were not carved very nicely. We call those nicely carved stones ashlar masonry, okay? Nicely carved on all sides. We'll see examples of them specifically. You see a few of them here. You see how well cut the stones are on the ends of these walls. Each one of these piers separating the chambers have these ashlar masonries. You see them at the corner right here. You see them here. Okay? That's another characteristic that Yadin noticed here at Hatzor that was associated with the architecture of these 2 elements of the fortifications of Hatzor, a royal city. Another example you can see in plan here. I don't have to go through it too heavily. The green being Solomon again, the gold or orange being that of Ahab, the 9th century. Ahab's houses were very typical Israelite houses, by the way. The plan here, do you see it? A broad room in the back with 3 long rooms in the front. They can be subdivided, but broad room, 3 rooms there. These are actually marketplaces or storehouses near the gate where they could bring their crops in and immediately sell them or store them or both. Okay, Yadin noticed these several items at Hatzor. He was also acquainted with our text, 1 Kings 9:15. So he thought, hey, if Hatzor has these items from the 10th century, if they could be Solomonic, would there be similar things at Megiddo and Gezer? Now, Megiddo, this right here, you can see Mount Carmel or the Carmel Mountains stretching across right here. The Mediterranean Sea would be beyond them over there, but this is the Jezreel Valley or the Esdraelon Valley, the breadbasket of Israel. Megiddo overlooking all of this right at the pass going up into the Carmel Mountains off here to the left. So it was situated right there on the map. Megiddo had been excavated by the University of Chicago. A very famous Egyptologist named Henry Breasted had excavated here in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. And they produced very nice reports. They had a lot of money, Rockefeller money. But even Rockefeller money fell through. They wanted to excavate the whole site all the way down to the bottom. They only got through 4 of the layers of the site when Rockefeller even gave up. He realized that it was a money losing endeavor. However, the excavations were extremely important. And so Yadin studied these reports that the University of Chicago excavators had done. And he found several interesting things all along here. If you look closely, you can see 2 parallel lines going along here. Can you see that? Casemate wall. The city gate was over here. I'll show you that in a little bit. But first I show you this. This is what the University of Chicago excavators found, and this is what they said. They said all this in blue was Solomonic. All right? Yadin looked at it, and he noticed that there were 4 chambers here, whereas in the gate below, there were 6. Do you see that? And below the blue solid wall, which he also had at Hatzor, actually it's called an inset offset wall. Do you see how there are insets and offsets involved? He noticed that under that was the casemate wall. So he was saying, hey, what the University of Chicago people thought was Solomon, the blue, isn't. It's Ahab, because that's what I have up at Hatzor. And archaeologists love to do this. They love to, here's what I found. It influences everything else, right? Yeah, we love to do that. And sometimes we're right. Well, Yadin said they were wrong. The blue actually is Ahab. And here's the water source over here that went down to actually a pool. There was a tunnel associated with it outside the walls. And a whole bunch of storehouses or marketplaces associated with Ahab. A palace of Solomon down here. Okay? So this was a major site, both strategically and in terms of architecture for both Ahab and Solomon. 6-chamber gate up here and towers in front. Let me show you a picture of this gateway. And I can introduce you to an aspect of archaeology that we love, and that is what we call stratigraphy. The strata that are involved. If you go to mountains, you'll often see strata. Come up to Canada sometime, visit Banff. You'll see the mountains stratigraphy very clearly. Some of it bent up like this as the mountains crushed together. But the stratigraphy, this is Ahab's solid inset offset wall. Look how it goes over the Solomonic 6-chamber gate. 1 chamber here, 1 here, and 1 here. This one filled in to support Ahab's wall, and another one here. The opposite side had been removed by the University of Chicago excavators, so that was already gone. But Yadin found this. And look at the ends of the walls. What do you notice about them? Ashlar stones, right? And when Yadin measured this gate and compared it with what he had found at Hatzor, boing, they were within inches of each other. Really, it was amazing. And so we have here 2 strata, we like to say in archaeology. Solomon's gate with the ashlar stones right here, and Ahab's inset offset city wall going above. Very clear stratigraphy, we archaeologists like to say. If there's any proof that this 6-chamber gate is earlier than the solid wall, it's there. If you go a little farther beyond, just off the picture over here, you see this. You see the casemate wall. Here's the inner wall right here, and the outer wall right here, with a cross wall here. This may be a cross wall with a door going between the 2 rooms in the casemate wall. So here at Megiddo, also a 6-chamber gate dated to the 10th century, the time of Solomon, and a casemate wall dated to the 10th century, the time of Solomon. So Yadin concluded, and most archaeologists still say this is so, except for that one Israeli I talked to you about at first, whose name is Israel Finkelstein. We call him Finky. Don't tell him I said that, though. Yeah, and so we have these 2 things also at Megiddo. They had been at Hatzor. They are now, Yadin suggested and proved to most of us that that was indeed the case. I'm going to skip over that one. That was a model of Megiddo from the time of Ahab that the University of Chicago excavators had done. This picture is a little difficult to see, maybe for some of you, because it includes items from the time of Jacob, this wall out here, actually, this gate here, and of time of Moses, this wall going along here. Solomon's complex was right here. You see that it's much smaller than the earlier ones. Do you see what the spies saw when they came into the Holy Land? They saw a massive, massive city gate and towers and a wall. And this wall that they would have encountered, and the stones that were involved were huge. We call it cyclopean because only the Cyclops, the one-eyed monsters in the Greek story, the Greek heroic saga of Odysseus, only a Cyclops could have moved those stones. So we have Cyclopean masonry. In Greece, from the Mycenaean period, Cyclopean masonry. So that's what we had here, and that's why the spies said there were giants, right? Only giants could have moved those stones. Solomon's structure was much smaller, much less pretentious. Maybe they didn't have quite the enemies that the earlier people had over here. But do you see the casemate wall running like this? When Yadin had found these two elements at Hatzor and then at Megiddo, he went down to Gezer, and there was an American team of archaeologists working there at the time. Very good archaeologists, by the way. It was a teaching ground for many of us who came along later. But so Yadin suggested what. I should start a little bit earlier. There was a British team who had been excavating Gezer in the 19-teens, 1908 to 1919s, World War, probably when World War I began, 1917. Or was it earlier, 1914? U.S. entered 1917. Anyway, they had been excavating here, and they had discovered this half of the city gate, the western half. And Yadin noticed that on the publications. And he said to the American team, you know, if you were to excavate over here, I bet you will find the eastern side of a 6-chambered city gate. And sure enough, after a couple of seasons, what did they find? Exactly that. And so if you visit Gezer today, you will see the complete city gate that is there, along with the casemate wall. This is the Gezer gate. Okay, outside the city right here, inside the city with an open plaza where hawkers could sell their figs and their grapes or whatever. And what do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chambers with 2 towers. Why are 6 chambers so important? They only occur in Israelite sites in the 10th century, the time of Solomon. Ever after, they built 4-chamber gates. Okay, so this is an important finding. It's rare to find these sorts of things. Inside each one of the chambers, do you see there were benches? This reminds me of the book of Ruth. Where did they go to bargain for Naomi's field? Boaz and the next of kin. They went to the gate. Why did they go to the gate? There would be a bunch of retired men hanging around sipping their tea. Well, not tea, but who knows what. Sitting around here, available to witness any negotiated agreement. That's why city gates were quite important. Justice is done in the city gate. Do you remember reading that in the Old Testament? A person will speak against you or for you in the gate. A frequent biblical phrase as you read the Old Testament. But that's because people would sit on these benches in the city gate waiting for news. outsiders coming in. What's happening up in Jerusalem or whatever? This is where your news or your gossip would first be heard. So you use these benches for those kinds of purposes. If you were to go to Gezer during the winter months, you would see it looking like this. Notice all the greenery? This is not desert. This is when crops are, these are all olive trees down here, and fields of the Bedouin. There's a Bedouin tent nearby. But if you look closely, you will see 1 chamber, 2, 3, and then the towers outside. 1, 2, 3 chambers. So 6 chambers. This going along here was an outlet for water. Excess water during heavy rainfall. By the way, Jerusalem can get 3 feet of snow in one storm. Lawrence of Arabia lost 18 camels in a snowstorm in Petra one time. So weather can be violent here. When it rains, it pours. We can talk about that with experience. This is my son here, standing in the gateway. Notice the ashlar masonries. We'll look at masonry. We'll look at that in a little bit. But in this picture, which is taken later in the summer, and the grass is not so green, you can see the 6 chambers, like that, but also you see the benches. Do you see them lining here? They're simply stones lining that. They would have had mud filling them. Here's some benches nicely preserved. Ashlar stones right here at the gate. More ashlar stones here and here. Okay, very typical to the ones we've seen already. At the very entrance, I should go back maybe, picture here is taken from here to here. We can see this manger, probably to feed donkeys if travelers came through. But you see more benches right here. You see the very nice ashlar masonry. Here, I'm going to teach you a little bit. This is Sabbath school, right? When a stone is, ashlar masonries would be ashlar stones would be rectangles. When the small side is facing out with going lengthwise into the wall, that's called a header. The head is on the outside. When it's the other way around and you have the long side facing out, that's a stretcher. So you have header, stretcher, like that with ashlar masonry oftentimes. But these gates were public places where people could gather together, hear news, and everything else. So what are the conclusions? Yadin had this wonderful experience comparing 3 cities. By the way, I should go back maybe, the dimensions of this gate at Gezer were also within a foot or so of the one at Megiddo and the one at Hatzor. It looks like all 3 of Solomon's royal cities, Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer, contained very similar public architecture. They used local stone to do it, and so you have a little bit different looks, and some gateways and walls are preserved better than others because there weren't the later buildings constructed on top. But Solomon's city gates were 6-chambered with towers in front, ashlar masonry at visible points, and very similar measurements. Later gates, all through Israel's history, had only 4 chambers, that is from Ahab and on. Ahab actually was a bigger builder than Solomon. The 9th century remains in Israel are copious. Solomon's city walls were casemate walls, 2 parallel walls with dividing walls. Later walls were solid, the inset-offset type, especially from the time of Ahab. Although later on, after Ahab, they weren't the inset-offset style. The dates for the construction of these major public structures was the 10th century. Now, how can we be so positive about that? Michelle mentioned that I like, it's called typology, how something develops through time. It can be handwriting. Try reading your grandparents' love letters up in the attic. It's hard. Try reading your pen pal from France. Reading a letter. Sometimes it can be quite hard. They make letters differently than we do. And if you know writing styles well enough, you can say where they're from and roughly when they were written. That's one thing I do. I did my doctoral dissertation on that. I compared about 700 seals, the writing on 700 seals, and was able to say what nationality they were. And because they were, we could do that, we could get tighter dates on the writing styles. I also like the way pottery develops through time. Pottery is found by as Dana Waters can attest, by the hundreds of thousands on any archaeological site, because it costs almost nothing to make. When you break it, you just throw it out. And so over the hundreds, thousands of years of history of a site, probably the site we've been excavating will have several million potsherds from it. Several, maybe even tens of millions. So it's that pottery, ubiquitous everywhere, that we date things. From the 10th century, there was a particular style of pottery. What they did, especially when they made their bowls, and bowls are the most frequent types of vessels in pottery assemblages from any one time period, they would take a smooth stone and run it over the clay so that it sealed parts of that clay that the stone touched. That's called burnishing. I don't know if there are any potters out here. You would know these terms. Burnishing, polishing the pottery. During the 10th century, they did a lot of that, but they did it by hand, doink, 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 like that. And so you can see that the pattern there are many strokes of the burnishing tool. Later on, they burnished on the wheel, and they just put the stone against it and let the wheel do it, so they have a spiral going around. That's called wheel burnishing. Well, in the 10th century, they didn't do wheel burnishing yet. They did hand burnishing. Before, they didn't do any burnishing. Afterwards, it was wheel burnishing. So how can we tell it's Solomonic? Hand-burnished bowls. And they're found by the thousands. So that's how Yadin was able to date things to the 10th century, and how we're still able to do it. So all three sites, these casemate walls and the gates, dated to the 10th century, the time of Solomon. There seems to have been, in fact, an architectural paradigm for all three sites. Like I said, we don't have the gate or the city wall, particularly of Solomon in Jerusalem yet. It will come someday. But there seems to have been an architectural paradigm, a common paradigm for all three. All three cities were large, important sites with great strategic value. For tax collecting, for military strategies, and so on. Would there have been the same architect for all of these cities? In fact, that's what many archaeologists now suggest. We don't have the Jerusalem data, although a fragment of the city wall from Jerusalem may have been found by an excavator in the last 5 or 6 years, but that's under some debate yet. I hope you understand now why I've preached this sermon from the text 1 Kings 9:15. It's a great text. And it helps us. It's the closest thing we have, the Archaeology of Solomon here, to proof of a biblical text being correct. It's the closest thing we have. Another was that inscription last night I showed that found at Caesarea that mentions Pontius Pilate, at least that he existed at that time, at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. But this is a really sensational discovery that has held through the test of time, except for a couple of scholars, archaeologists from the University of Tel Aviv. So I hope you now see why 1 Kings 9:15, you also will hold this in special esteem. That's it, Michelle.
Thank you, Dr. Herr, for that fascinating presentation. We are now going to take about a 30-minute recess. During that time, the choir needs to assemble, warm up, and rehearse to get ready for the 11 o'clock service. So we invite you to get a drink, maybe use the restroom, maybe even take a walk. It's a beautiful morning out, and visit. And be sure to be back at 11 o'clock for our next service, where Dr. Herr will give another presentation, a meditation on Psalms 23, and also, I understand, a very exciting children's story with live demonstration. So we'll see you all at 11 o'clock. Thank you.